The daughter-in-law slammed the back door so hard the whole house trembled. And there, standing quietly on the cold concrete of the small backyard, Helen Porter held a warm homemade apple pie, the kind she had baked for her son since he was a little boy. Sabrina didn't even bother to look at her. She pointed at the pie with disgust. "Take that somewhere else. I don't want your old-fashioned desserts cluttering up my kitchen." And right there, without hesitation, she shoved the pie out of Helen's hands. It fell to the ground with a soft, heartbreaking thud. The crust cracked, the cinnamon filling spilled across the pavement, and the woman who once gave everything she had to raise her only son was left staring at her gifts splattered on the floor, her hands trembling with shock. Can you imagine a 74-year-old woman, gentle and humble, trying to show love in the only way she knew how, only to be humiliated in her own son's yard by the woman he married? Because that's exactly what happened to Helen Porter, a mother who spent her entire life sacrificing every comfort so her boy could have a better future. While she bent down to clean the mess, her knees aching, her vision blurring, Sabrina stood over her, spotless and cold as winter, whispering, "You don't belong in our life anymore. Get used to it." But what Sabrina didn't know is that fate was already moving, and something happened just a few hours later, something so small, so unexpected, that would begin to unravel every lie she told, every cruelty she hid, and every illusion she built around the life she thought she controlled. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what you're about to discover will linger in your heart long after the video ends. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if you saw someone treat their own mother like this? Helen Porter was the kind of woman people in small towns remembered even years after she moved away. Not because she was loud or dramatic or attention-seeking, quite the opposite. She was memorable because she had a quiet kindness about her, the kind that settles into the heart like warm light on a winter morning. She smiled with her eyes, she listened more than she spoke, and she believed, deeply, stubbornly, that love was something you demonstrated, not something you demanded. Before everything went wrong, before the humiliation, before the coldness that crept into her son's home like an unwelcome fog, Helen lived in Cedar Harbor, a small coastal town on the northern tip of Maine, the kind of place where the smell of salt water clung to every porch and where seagulls argued loudly above the harbor. Her little yellow house sat on a hill overlooking the worn-down docks, and though it was old and cluttered with memories, it always smelled like cinnamon, vanilla, and whatever she had baked for the people she loved, especially for Ethan, her only son. Ethan grew up with the strength of a boy who was loved deeply but raised with sacrifice. His father had died when he was 6, leaving Helen with nothing but a pile of medical bills, a modest life insurance check, and a boy with big brown eyes who looked at her as if she was the entire world. She worked at the local diner during the mornings and cleaned summer rental cabins in the afternoons. Sometimes she took extra shifts scrubbing boats down by the docks, the cold wind stiffening her fingers as she worked. But she never complained, not once. "Work isn't punishment, sweetheart," she always told Ethan. "Work is just love with your hands." And Ethan believed her. He grew up seeing her leave before sunrise and return after sunset, sometimes carrying blistered hands or a sore back, but always with a smile for him. "How was your day, Mom?" he'd ask. "Better now that you're here," she'd answer. Their bond was simple, pure, unbroken. Every Friday night, no matter how tired she was, Helen baked apple pie, her signature recipe, passed from her grandmother to her mother, and then to her. A flaky crust dusted with sugar, apples sliced paper thin, cinnamon sprinkled like warm memory. She always made 2 pies, one for the weekend and one for Ethan to share at school or give to a neighbor who needed cheering up. Apple pie wasn't dessert for Helen. It was a language, her way of saying, "I'm here, I see you, I love you." Years passed. Ethan grew taller, smarter, more ambitious. Teachers called him gifted. Coaches said he had discipline. Neighbors said he was going to get out of that small town one day and make something of himself. Helen believed them. She kept scrapbooks of every achievement he had, report cards, sports ribbons, photos, even doodles he made as a child, not out of pride, but out of gratitude. "God gave me a good boy," she'd say quietly to herself while fixing his lunch. "A boy who'll do great things." And she was right. Ethan earned a scholarship to a business program at Northeastern University in Boston. The day he left for the city, Helen tucked a warm apple pie into a foil-covered dish wrapped in a clean dish towel and placed it gently in the passenger seat of his old car. "So you don't forget where you came from," she said with a smile, though her eyes shimmered with unspilled tears. "Mom, I could never forget that." He hugged her tight, tighter than he had in years. "I'll make you proud. You already have," she whispered into his shoulder, and then he drove away, toward a bigger world, a louder world, a world that would eventually swallow him whole in ways neither of them imagined. At first, Ethan called every night, then every few nights, then once a week, then less. He wasn't cruel, just busy, or at least that's what he told himself. Boston changed him. Not completely, but enough. Surrounded by ambition, expensive suits, high-rise buildings, and people who measured success in dollars instead of decency, Ethan began to reshape himself. He learned to speak with confidence, learned which restaurants mattered, learned how to blend in with people who never had to think twice about paying rent. And that's where he met her. Sabrina Wallace, beautiful, sharp, stylish, raised in an upper-class family in Beacon Hill, educated in private schools, quick with compliments, but quicker with criticism. She carried herself with the kind of grace that comes from never having to worry about the price of anything. Ethan was captivated. Sabrina was impressed by his ambition, his drive, his hunger to rise. But there was one part of him she never understood, never appreciated, and gradually began to resent: Helen. The first time she met Helen was during a weekend visit to Cedar Harbor. Ethan had described his mother as sweet and old-fashioned, but Sabrina clearly hadn't imagined someone so simple, so unpolished, so humble. Helen greeted her with open arms, a warm smile, and, of course, an apple pie she baked that morning with extra cinnamon, hoping to make a good impression. "Oh," Sabrina said, holding the foil-covered dish as if it might leak. "That's quaint. Thank you. Quaint." Helen felt that word in her bones. Later that night, when Helen asked if Sabrina liked the pie, the young woman smiled tightly. "It's fine. I'm just not used to heavy desserts." Helen nodded, though she could tell the girl hadn't even tasted it. Love makes mothers forgive the small things, and sometimes the big ones, too. Over the years, Sabrina's comments grew sharper, though always hidden behind polite smiles. "Your mom means well, Ethan, but she's a little overwhelming. Does she really have to visit so often? Her texts come at odd hours. It's distracting. She doesn't really fit in with our lifestyle. I'm not trying to be rude, just honest." Honest, a word people often use to disguise cruelty. Ethan didn't notice it at first, or maybe he did, but ignored it because confronting the truth meant confronting the life he was building with Sabrina, and that was a life he desperately wanted to protect. So the visits home became shorter, then rarer, then almost non-existent. Helen waited on the porch, watching cars go by, hoping one of them carried her son. Sometimes she made apple pie anyway, just in case he showed up unannounced like he used to. He never did. Still, she loved him. Mothers don't stop loving. They simply learn to love quietly. Meanwhile, in Boston, Sabrina subtly positioned herself as the gatekeeper of Ethan's world. She filtered his calls, controlled his schedule, set boundaries that were never spoken but always enforced. "Your mom doesn't need to come over all the time. We're starting a new life, Ethan, not clinging to the old one. It's embarrassing when she brings those homemade things everywhere." Homemade. The word tasted like dismissal. Little by little, Sabrina wrapped Ethan's routines, decisions, and priorities around her own expectations. And he, wanting peace, wanting stability, let her. But one tiny crack had already formed. It would take time, pain, and truth for it to split open. But it would, because love can be buried, ignored, pushed aside, even humiliated. but it never truly dies. And eventually, the truth always claws its way back to the surface. For now, Helen kept loving from afar, kept baking apple pies on Fridays, kept sending texts that sometimes went unanswered, kept believing, stubbornly, that the heart of a son never forgets where it came from. And then one day, without warning, fate decided it was time. Time for Ethan to see what he had been blind to. Time for Sabrina's mask to slip. Time for truth to walk into the room and sit beside him. Uninvited, undeniable, because the next time Ethan visited home, he would see something he could never unsee. Something that would change everything. Forever. The morning Ethan decided to drive to Cedar Harbor wasn't planned. He had a full schedule. Breakfast meeting at 8:30, a project pitch at 11, dinner with investors at 7. Everything in his calendar was neatly organized, color-coded by Sabrina, so there was no room for unexpected distractions, as she liked to call them. But sometimes the heart has a way of interrupting what the mind pretends to control. He had woken up before the alarm, restless, not anxious, just heavy, like something inside him was unsettled. Sabrina was already up, applying makeup in the warm glow of the bathroom light. She didn't notice his silence or the crease on his forehead. "Don't forget, you promised to iron my blouse for tonight," she said. Ethan blinked. Right, yeah, I'll take care of it." She didn't look at him, didn't hear the emptiness in his voice. He walked to the kitchen, poured himself coffee, and stared out the window at the city waking up. Cars honking, people hurrying, delivery trucks blocking lanes. Life moved fast, almost too fast, and for the first time in months, he wondered when he had last slowed down long enough to breathe. A single thought floated through him with surprising strength. I miss home. Not the apartment, not Boston, not the life he built. Home, the small yellow house, the sound of seagulls, his mother's voice calling him from the porch, the warm smell of apple pie cooling by the window. Helen. He hadn't seen her in nearly 5 months. He told himself he'd been busy. He told himself she understood. He told himself she didn't need much. He lied. And that morning, for reasons he couldn't explain, he grabbed his keys, walked out the door without finishing his coffee, and drove north, away from the concrete and glass towers, away from the noise, away from the carefully constructed life that suddenly felt very, very thin. He didn't tell Sabrina where he was going. She would have tried to stop him, or worse, convinced him he was being dramatic. The highway stretched ahead in long gray lines. As the city faded, his chest loosened. By the time he crossed into the quiet roads leading to Cedar Harbor, the air smelled like pine and ocean again, and he realized he'd been starving for that smell without knowing it. But before Ethan reached his mother's house, Helen was living a very different morning. She woke early, as always, even though her knees ached and her back pulsed with a dull, familiar pain. Age had settled into her bones, but her spirit hadn't changed. She moved slowly but with purpose, humming an old hymn as she tied her apron. She baked an apple pie, not for any occasion, not because anyone asked, but because Fridays were apple pie days, a ritual she had never abandoned, even when Ethan stopped coming home on weekends. Maybe, she whispered to herself, maybe he'll visit today. She didn't expect it, but hope has a way of blooming even when neglected. Around mid-morning, she packed the warm pie carefully into a sturdy glass dish, placed it inside a reusable grocery bag, and set it on the counter. The house was still, too still. She missed conversations, footsteps, noise, anything that reminded her she wasn't alone. She had been thinking about delivering the pie to a neighbor who recently lost her husband, but something made her pause, a gentle tug in her heart. Maybe I'll save this one for Ethan, she thought, smiling softly. Even if he didn't come, she liked imagining the possibility. She didn't know it yet, but her son was already on the road, driving toward her. Fate had begun its subtle work, but someone else was headed her way too. The sound of tires crunching on gravel outside made Helen look up. Before she could even reach the window, the back door swung open, without knocking. It was Sabrina. Her presence filled the kitchen like a cold draft. She wore designer sunglasses despite the cloudy morning, her hair perfectly styled, her handbag dangling from her wrist as if she were allergic to touching anything that wasn't expensive. "Good," she said, stepping inside without invitation. "You're here." Helen smiled gently anyway. "Morning, sweetheart. I wasn't expecting." "Yeah, I know." Sabrina waved a dismissive hand. "I need to grab something Ethan left here the last time." "Where is it?" "Well, I'm not sure, darling. It might be." "Forget it. I'll find it myself." Sabrina set her bag on the table with a thud and started opening drawers as if she owned the place. Helen stood quietly, hands clasped, not wanting to intrude. She wasn't used to guests behaving that way, but she tried to be patient. "Would you like some tea?" Helen asked softly. "No." Then Sabrina spotted the pie on the counter. "Is that an apple pie?" "Yes," Helen said, brightening. "Just came out of the oven. Ethan used to love—" "Oh, please," Sabrina sighed. "He's grown up. He doesn't eat stuff like that anymore. Too much sugar, too many carbs. Honestly, Helen, I don't know why you keep making these old-fashioned things. Nobody wants them." Helen's smile faltered just a little, barely noticeable except to someone who understood her heart. "I make it because, well, I've always made it," she said softly. "Yeah, well, don't bring it to our house. It just ends up going in the trash." Sabrina opened another drawer and slammed it shut. "Found it, finally." She walked toward the door, then paused as if remembering something. She turned back, her gaze landing once more on the pie. "Actually," she said with a thin smile, "it's probably best if you don't keep this here either, in case Ethan comes by and thinks it's a good idea to take it home." Helen blinked. "You don't want him to have it?" "No, it ruins his diet. And honestly," her voice sharpened, "making these things all the time makes you look clingy, like you're trying too hard to stay involved." Clingy. Another word that struck deep. Helen swallowed. "Sabrina, I'm just his mother." "Exactly," Sabrina said, shrugging. "Which means you should give him space. You don't fit into his life the way you used to." Helen's chest tightened. But before she could gather a response, not anger, just sorrow, Sabrina stepped forward and with a single swift motion shoved the pie off the counter. It fell to the floor. The crust shattered. The warm cinnamon filling spilled across the tiles like a wound opening. Helen gasped quietly, kneeling despite the pain slicing through her joints. Sabrina watched her, cold, clean, unmoved. "See? It's messy, just like all your traditions." And then she left. The back door slammed, rattling the window panes. Helen stayed on her knees for a few moments, breathing unevenly, before she whispered to herself, "It's all right. It's all right, sweetheart. Pies come and go." But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. She cleaned slowly, carefully, wiping away the symbol of years of love poured into every slice. As fate would have it, Ethan turned onto his mother's street at that exact moment. He parked his car, stepped out, and smiled. He had forgotten how quiet the town was, how peaceful. The seagulls, the soft whistle of the wind, the scent of damp earth. But as he approached the house, something made him freeze. The back door slammed. Someone, a woman, walked briskly toward a parked car. Sabrina. His chest tightened. What is she doing here? She got in her car and drove away fast. Too fast. Ethan frowned, then hurried to the door. "Mom?" he called out gently. "Mom, I'm here." Yeah, inside he found her kneeling on the floor, wiping cinnamon filling from the tiles with trembling hands. "Mom?" he whispered, horrified. Helen turned her face toward him, and in that single glance, in the way her eyes glimmered with surprise, love, and a pain she tried desperately to hide, Ethan knew something was wrong, deeply wrong. "Ethan, sweetheart," she said, forcing a smile. "I didn't expect you today." He knelt beside her, took the cloth gently from her hands, and said in a voice already cracking, "Mom, what happened here?" Helen opened her mouth to answer, but the truth, the full truth, had only begun to reveal itself, because this was only the beginning of everything Ethan was about to uncover. For a long moment, Ethan just stared at the floor, at the splattered cinnamon filling, the cracked crust, the broken glass dish his mother had used for as long as he could remember. He looked at the mess, then at her trembling hands, and something inside him twisted painfully. "Mom," he said softly, "please tell me what happened." Helen smiled. A small, practiced smile she'd used many times to reassure him when he was young, when money was tight, when life was heavy. But now, that smile only made the truth more heartbreaking. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, brushing her palms on her apron. "It was just an accident. These old hands aren't as steady as they used to be." Ethan didn't move, didn't breathe. He knew his mother. She would rather take the blame, rather protect someone else, than admit she'd been mistreated. He gently lifted her hands. They were slightly red, as if she'd scraped them on the floor while cleaning. "Did you drop it?" he asked quietly. Her eyes flickered downward. A hesitation, small but enough. "It doesn't matter," she whispered. But it did. It mattered more than anything. Ethan took a slow breath, trying to keep his voice calm. "Mom, I saw Sabrina leaving." Her body stiffened, so subtly that most people wouldn't have noticed. But Ethan did. "I didn't know she was coming here today," he added. Helen's hands tightened around the cloth she was holding. "She just stopped by to pick something up, that's all." "And the pie?" "Oh, sweetheart." She shook her head. "Don't make a fuss. I must have startled her, that's all. Young women get stressed easily, and I don't want to come between you two." The more she tried to protect Sabrina, the more Ethan's stomach churned. He remembered small things, moments he had dismissed, comments Sabrina made that he brushed off, the way Sabrina sometimes sighed whenever Helen called, or ignored her texts because work was busy, even on weekends, or rolled her eyes when Helen gave them homemade gifts. He replayed every moment, and suddenly, they painted a different picture, one he hadn't allowed himself to see. "Mom, did Sabrina push the pie?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling now. Helen froze. He saw it, the truth flickering behind her eyes. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Silence is its own confession. But still, she whispered, "Please, son, don't cause trouble. I don't want tension in your marriage." That sentence, simple, earnest, heartbreaking, cut through Ethan like a blade. He lifted her chin gently. "Mom, nothing justifies someone treating you like this. Not stress, not misunderstandings, not marriage, nothing." Helen's eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. "Sweetheart, I've lived long enough to know some things aren't worth fighting over," she said softly. "You and Sabrina, you have your life. I don't want to be a burden." The word burden hit him like a punch. "You could never be a burden," he said more forcefully than he intended. She smiled, the saddest smile he'd ever seen. "Mothers always say that," she whispered. He swallowed hard. There was so much he wanted to say, so much he needed to understand. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Because you're happy," she answered, simply. "Or at least, I thought you were." He felt the ground shift beneath him. How many times had she stayed quiet? How many humiliations had she endured without him knowing? How long had she been carrying this alone? He helped her up slowly, steadying her as she stood. "Come sit," he said gently. She hesitated. There's still a mess." "I'll clean it," he promised. "Please, just sit." Helen allowed him to guide her to the small wooden chair by the window. The sunlight made her silver hair glow softly, and for a moment Ethan saw her as she used to be, strong, hopeful, radiant. But time and pain had settled in her expression. As he cleaned the floor in silence, Helen watched him with a mixture of love and worry. "I don't want you to be upset with Sabrina," she murmured. He paused, gripping the cloth tighter. "I'm not upset," he said. "I'm concerned. There's a difference. You have a big life in the city," she said, smiling sadly. "I don't want to pull you away from it." "Mom, you never could," he said, but his voice wavered. When the floor was clean, Ethan made tea, the way she liked it, weak, with a touch of honey. He watched her as she sipped, her hand still trembling faintly. Something inside him broke wide open. He'd been gone too long, absent too much, blind for far too many years. "Mom," he said softly, I need to know something, and I want you to be honest. She looked down at the teacup. He continued carefully, Has Sabrina been unkind to you before? Helen opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her silence was louder than words. Mom, he whispered. Please. She swallowed. She's just different from us. Raised differently. She doesn't mean harm. Ethan stared at her. Did she ever tell you not to visit? He asked. Helen looked away. Did she ever block your calls? A tiny breath escaped her. A breath filled with truth. She said, Helen murmured, she said you were overwhelmed and she was helping you manage your time. Ethan's chest tightened. Mom, I never said that. Helen nodded. I figured as much. Did she ever tell you I didn't want you to come over? Helen hesitated long enough for the answer to be clear. Sometimes, she whispered. A deep, burning ache spread through Ethan's ribs. Not just anger, shame. He had let this happen. He had been so consumed with work, ambition, city life, and Sabrina's expectations that he didn't notice his mother shrinking, folding inward, becoming smaller to take up less room in his world. Mom, I'm so sorry, he said, voice breaking. Helen reached out, placing her warm, familiar hand over his. Oh, honey, it's all right. Life pulls us in many directions. I never blamed you. But he blamed himself, deeply. He leaned back, staring at the small kitchen, the floral curtains, the chipped mugs, the refrigerator covered in faded photos of him as a boy. Photos he hadn't looked at in years. He whispered, almost to himself, How did I miss this? Helen squeezed his hand gently. Because you trusted the woman you married, she said softly. And that's a beautiful thing, Ethan. Don't fault yourself for loving. He shook his head. Love doesn't look like this, he said. Not what she did to you. Helen didn't argue. She simply lowered her eyes, a quiet acceptance of a truth she had long been trying to ignore. Son, she whispered, please don't confront her. I don't want trouble. He looked at her, the woman who gave him everything, and realized she was still trying to protect him even now. I won't pick a fight, he said gently, but I will find the truth, all of it. Helen's breath trembled, and Ethan knew, without a doubt, that something far worse had been happening. Something his mother had kept hidden out of love, fear, and dignity. Mom, he said softly, I'm staying here tonight, if that's all right. Her eyes brightened instantly. Of course it's all right, she said. I'll make up your old room. No, he interrupted kindly. Sit. Rest, please. I'll take care of everything. And for once, she let him. As he moved through the house, changing sheets, dusting shelves, noticing little signs of neglect, unopened envelopes, outdated medication bottles, blankets worn too thin, a realization began to settle. His mother wasn't just lonely. She wasn't just being disrespected. She had been suffering in silence, trying not to disturb the life he built, trying not to disturb him. And that was something Ethan could no longer ignore. But fate had something else waiting too, something that would force the truth into the open, violently, painfully, undeniably, because the next day Ethan would witness the full cruelty his mother had endured, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, Cedar Harbor woke slowly, wrapped in a cool mist that drifted inland from the ocean. The grass sparkled with dew. The gulls cried overhead. Helen rose early, as she always did, even though her sleep had been thin and restless. Too many thoughts. Too much she wanted to protect Ethan from. Too much she feared he had already seen. Ethan insisted on making breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, and the lightest, gentlest coffee, exactly the way Helen liked it. He moved around the kitchen the way a grown son does when he suddenly realizes how much he has forgotten, touching familiar objects with unfamiliar hands, noticing details he'd ignored for years. Mom, this pan is older than me, he teased softly. Helen laughed, a small warm sound that faded quickly. I'm not one to change what still works. But she wasn't looking at the pan, she was looking at him. Maybe today will be good, she thought. Maybe today things will feel normal again. Ethan sat across from her, watching her carefully. How are you feeling? He asked. Oh, I'm fine, she answered, waving a hand. Just a bit tired. Happens with age. But he noticed the stiffness in her movements, the slight favoring of her right knee, the way she hid a small wince when she stood to get more napkins. "Mom," he said gently, "promise me you'll let me take care of you a little today." Helen smiled. "You've already done enough just by being here." If only he knew how long she had waited for that being here. Around noon, Ethan decided to run to the local market to buy groceries for lunch. "I'm making something special," he said. "Oh, and what's that?" "Something without sugar or carbs, just to annoy Sabrina," he joked. Helen chuckled, shaking her head. "You two," she murmured, though her heart tightened. As Ethan grabbed his keys, he turned back toward her. "Mom, I mean it. Don't worry about her. I'm here now." Helen nodded, but she didn't fully believe it. Not yet. Still, she felt lighter when he left, hopeful even. She decided to tidy the small backyard while he was gone. The sun had broken through the mist, warming the concrete. She swept slowly, humming an old hymn, thinking about whether she had enough apples to bake another pie for Ethan before he returned to Boston. She didn't hear the car right away. She didn't hear the footsteps on the gravel. Her back was turned when the gate opened. "Seriously?" Sabrina's voice cut through the air, sharp as broken glass. Helen stiffened. When she turned, Sabrina was standing at the gate with a tote bag slung over one shoulder, perfectly styled despite the casual setting. Her eyes scanned the yard like it offended her. "Sabrina," Helen said softly, I know you didn't expect me." She walked inside without waiting for permission. "I need to pick up something else Ethan left here. Again. Honestly, he's gotten so disorganized lately." Helen held the broom against her chest, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. "Where is he?" Sabrina demanded. "He went to the market," Helen replied calmly. Sabrina rolled her eyes. "Figures. Running errands for you." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You just love pulling him back here, don't you?" Helen blinked. "I never asked him to come." "Sure you didn't," Sabrina snapped. "But he feels guilty. And you know how to use that, don't you?" The words hit so hard that Helen physically stepped backward. "Sabrina, I would never—" "Save it." "Ah." Sabrina walked past her toward the house, muttering, "This place smells like old people." Helen stayed where she was, her hand trembling on the broom handle. When she finally followed inside, she found Sabrina rifling through drawers, slamming cabinets, muttering about how cluttered everything was. "I keep things in their places," Helen said gently, trying to be helpful. "Well, your places make no sense." Helen opened her mouth to apologize, out of habit, but a sound outside caught her ear. Footsteps. Slow. Approaching. But she didn't turn in time. Sabrina spotted something on the counter. A new pie dish. Clean. Empty. Waiting. It was the backup dish Helen used when she planned to bake 2 pies in the same day. "Oh my God," Sabrina scoffed. "Are you making another one?" Helen shook her head. "I was thinking—" "Of course you were thinking of baking again," Sabrina interrupted, her voice mocking. "Because that's all you know how to do, isn't it? Hover, bake, smother, repeat." Helen flinched. "I'm sorry if it bothers you." "Bothers me," Sabrina laughed, cold, humorless. "Everything you do bothers me because you don't know your place." The doorway filled with afternoon light. Ethan had returned, but neither woman saw him yet. Sabrina stepped closer, her eyes sharp with irritation. "I don't know how many times I have to say this, Helen," she hissed. "You don't belong in our life the way you used to. Stop trying to force your way in." Helen felt her throat tighten. "I'm not forcing anything," she whispered. "Oh, please," Sabrina scoffed. "You manipulate him with your sad little traditions, your pies, your poor me routines. It's pathetic." The broom slipped from Helen's hand. "Sabrina, why are you saying these things?" she wanted to ask, but the words wouldn't come. Sabrina stepped even closer, her voice low, venomous. "Ethan is too polite to tell you the truth, so I'll say it for him. You are holding him back. He doesn't have room for you in his life anymore." For the first time, Helen's eyes filled with tears. "Sabrina, I'm his mother." "Exactly." Sabrina said, her expression twisting with disdain. A mother who doesn't know when to let go. Behind them, a shadow moved. Ethan. He stood frozen in the doorway, market bag in one hand, devastation in his eyes. He heard every word, every cruel syllable, every lie disguised as truth. His throat tightened, his pulse hammered, his world cracked open. But Sabrina didn't see him, not yet. She leaned in closer to Helen, her tone colder than ice. "And let me make one thing very clear," she said slowly. "If you keep showing up, if you keep calling, if you keep pretending you matter to him—" Helen's chest rose sharply. "Pretending?" she whispered. "Yes," Sabrina snapped. "Pretending, because the truth is—" She grabbed the empty pie dish off the counter. "This is all you are good for." And she threw it. Not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to shatter. The dish hit the floor and exploded into shards. Helen gasped, stepping back, her hand over her heart. The sound echoed through the small kitchen, and that was the moment Ethan finally moved. "What the hell are you doing?" Sabrina spun around, and the blood drained from her face. Ethan?" His eyes burned, not with anger, but with something deeper, betrayal, horror, awakening. "Did you just throw that at my mother?" he demanded, stepping toward them. Helen shook her head quickly. "Ethan, sweetheart, please." But he wasn't listening. He stepped between them, protective instinct rising like a storm. "Sabrina," he said, voice trembling with hurt. "What is wrong with you?" Sabrina's mouth opened and closed, struggling to recover her composure. It wasn't like that," she stammered. She provoked me." "Provoked you?" Ethan repeated, stunned. "She was sweeping the backyard?" Helen touched his arm gently. "Please, son, don't fight." But the silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Sabrina straightened her shoulders, trying to regain her superiority. "I'm not going to be treated like a villain in some run-down little house," she said sharply. "You need to choose, Ethan. Either you cut this cord, or you stay stuck in this depressing, suffocating life." Ethan stared at her, long, hard, as if seeing her clearly for the first time, and what he saw shattered him. He inhaled slowly. "Sabrina," he said quietly, "I think you should leave." She blinked, stunned. "Excuse me?" "Leave," he repeated, voice steady now. "We'll talk later when I've calmed down, but right now, go." Sabrina waited for him to soften, to retract, to apologize. He didn't, so she grabbed her purse, shot Helen a final glare, and walked out. The door slammed behind her. The house exhaled. Helen's knees wobbled. Ethan caught her before she fell, and for a long moment they didn't speak, didn't move, just breathed. Finally, Ethan whispered, "Mom, what else has she done to you?" Helen closed her eyes. And the truth, the real truth, was about to come to light, but not yet, because there was still more he needed to discover, more he needed to see, more that fate had been quietly recording behind his back, and the worst was yet to come. For several minutes after Sabrina left, the house remained painfully quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful, the kind that feels like something sacred has been broken. Helen sat at the small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she no longer drank. Ethan stood by the counter, staring at the pieces of shattered glass on the floor. He wanted to sweep them immediately, to fix something, anything, but his hands were trembling too much. "Mom," he said softly, "I need you to tell me the truth now." Helen looked up. Her eyes were red but dry, as if she'd already run out of tears. "Sweetheart, I don't want to make things harder for you." "Oh, you're not making anything harder," he said gently. "Keeping secrets is." She let out a slow breath, one that sounded like surrender. "What do you want to know?" she whispered. Ethan pulled out the chair beside her and sat down, leaning forward. "Mom, has Sabrina been treating you like this for a long time?" Helen's eyes flickered, not in denial, but in pain. "I never wanted you to see this side of things," she murmured. "You had so much on your plate, work, responsibilities. I didn't want to add my problems to yours." "Mom, you are my responsibility," Ethan said, You always have been. She smiled faintly. Not anymore, honey. You're grown. You have your own world now. That doesn't mean you're not part of it. His voice tightened. Did she yell at you before? Helen hesitated, a silence that answered the question before she did. Not always yelling, she finally whispered, but sometimes, if I called at the wrong time, or if I stopped by without warning. She said I was intruding. She told me I needed to respect boundaries. Ethan felt something inside him break. And you believed her? I tried to, Helen said softly, because I didn't want to be the reason you two fought. He exhaled shakily. What about visits? Did she tell you not to come? Helen looked away, shame flickering across her features. She said, her voice faltered, she said you preferred it that way, that you needed space, that your life was too busy for drop-ins. Ethan's chest tightened so painfully he had to straighten up to breathe. I never said that, Mom. I know that now, she whispered. But at the time, I didn't want to make trouble. I thought maybe she knew you better than I did. You've grown so much since you left Cedar Harbor, and sometimes I didn't want to admit that I didn't fit into your new life. Her voice cracked. I didn't want to believe it, but part of me was afraid it was true. Ethan reached across the table and took her hands in his. Listen to me, he said firmly. You fit into my life more than anyone, more than anything. You are the beginning of everything I am. Helen squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening. I never wanted to be in the way, she whispered. You were never in the way, he repeated. Never. She nodded slowly, though the weight of years of doubt didn't lift so easily. Mom, he said after a moment, I need to know everything, not just what happened today. Helen inhaled deeply, bracing herself. There were little things, she began softly. At first I thought they were misunderstandings. Like what? Well, once I called you to wish you luck before a big presentation. Sabrina answered and said you were sleeping. She sounded irritated. Later, when I asked how it went, you told me you'd been up early prepping for hours. She never told you I'd called. Ethan's jaw clenched. Another time, Helen continued, I brought you a scarf I knitted for Christmas. Sabrina said you wouldn't like it, too outdated. She told me to take it back home, but I left it anyway. A month later, I found it in the trunk of my car, with the tag still on it. Ethan let out a sharp breath. He remembered that Christmas. Sabrina had told him his mother forgot her gift at home. And, Helen hesitated. Her voice shrank. There were moments when she didn't let me into your apartment. She what? Ethan asked, stunned. Helen looked down at her hands. Twice. Once she said there was a plumbing issue. Another time she said you were sick and didn't want company. But when you called me that evening, you sounded perfectly fine. I didn't want to accuse her of lying, so I just pretended nothing happened. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, pacing the floor, his breath unsteady. Mom, why didn't you tell me any of this? She answered without hesitation. Because you loved her, she said simply, and I never wanted to be the reason that changed. That sentence gutted him. He sat again, trying to control the wave of emotions rolling through him. What else? He asked, voice low but steady. Helen took a long moment before continuing. Sabrina, sometimes she said things about me, that I embarrassed you, that you were trying to move forward in life and I kept pulling you back. She made it sound like the best thing I could do for you was stay out of the way. A tear slid down her cheek, but her voice never rose. I tried to understand her, she whispered. I tried so hard. I know I'm not sophisticated or polished like people in the city. I know I don't always say the right thing. I didn't want to cause trouble. Ethan felt his eyes burn. Mom, you are the kindest person I have ever known, he said. You worked your whole life to give me opportunities. You never complained, never asked for anything. You deserve respect. From me, from her, from anyone. Helen shook her head softly. Sweetheart, disrespect doesn't always come suddenly. Sometimes it grows little by little, like weeds in a garden. By the time you notice, they've choked everything. Ethan swallowed hard. Was today the worst? He asked gently. Helen hesitated, then nodded. Yes, she whispered. But it wasn't the first time she said I didn't belong. Her voice trembled. It was just the first time you heard it. Those words echoed through the room like a broken bell. Ethan stood abruptly, unable to sit any longer. I need air, he muttered. He walked to the porch and leaned against the railing, staring at the harbor below. Waves pushed against the rocks, steady and relentless. The way anger was rising inside him. He felt betrayed, not only by Sabrina, but by himself. How had he let this happen? How had he not seen it sooner? His mother had been suffering alone, shrinking, folding herself smaller and smaller so she wouldn't disturb the life he built, and he hadn't noticed. Behind him, the door opened softly. "Ethan?" Helen's voice was gentle. "Please don't blame yourself, you didn't know." "But I should have," he whispered. She stepped beside him, her hand brushing his arm. "Life pulls people apart," she said softly. "Sometimes without us realizing. Sabrina, she has her flaws, but maybe she acted out of insecurity, fear of losing you. I don't want you to hate her, sweetheart." Ethan turned to her sharply. "Mom, this isn't insecurity. It's cruelty." She looked at him with a softness that only mothers have. "Sometimes people hurt others when they don't understand love," she said quietly. "And sometimes they don't know how to be gentle." Her words, so merciful, made his heart ache even more. "Mom," he said after a long silence, "I need to understand the full picture, not just from you. I'm going to talk to the neighbors and check your phone and—" "Ethan, no!" she said quickly, alarmed. "Mom, I'm not doing this to cause pain. I'm doing it to stop it." Helen's shoulders sagged. She knew he wouldn't let this go. Not now. Not after witnessing what he saw. "At least, be kind," she whispered. "I will," he promised, "but I won't be blind anymore." That afternoon, Ethan began to uncover the pieces Sabrina had worked hard to hide. He found texts on Helen's phone that had never been opened, messages he had sent her months earlier. He found call logs with several missed calls from Helen that he never knew about. He found an email he'd sent her about visiting for Thanksgiving, forwarded to Sabrina's email, but never to Helen. He stepped outside, trying to breathe through the pain. Then a voice called from across the fence. "Ethan, is that you?" It was Mrs. Kerrigan, the neighbor who had known him since childhood. "Oh, honey," she said, shaking her head. "I'm glad you're here. Your mother didn't deserve what's been happening." Ethan froze. "What have you seen?" he asked slowly. The elderly neighbor sighed, her face full of sympathy. "More than she ever wanted you to know." And as she spoke, telling him things his mother never would, Ethan felt something shift deep inside him. The truth wasn't just painful, it was rage-inducing, and it was time to act. Mrs. Kerrigan leaned her elbows on the fence the same way she had for 40 years, the way she used to watch Ethan chase seagulls as a boy, or ride his bike down the hill with his shoelaces untied. But today her expression was not fond or amused. It was troubled, heavy. "Ethan," she said softly, "I didn't want to get involved, but your mother deserved better." He swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" The old woman hesitated, looking toward Helen's kitchen window as if making sure she wasn't listening. "Your mother is proud," she began. "She would rather go hungry than tell you she's hurting. And she definitely wouldn't tell you what that wife of yours has been doing." The words hit him like a cold gust of wind. "Mrs. Kerrigan, what have you seen?" She took a breath, more than anyone should. Ethan forced himself to stay calm, even as dread gathered like a storm inside him. "Go on," he said. The neighbor nodded slowly. "There were days," she said, "when your mother stood outside your apartment building for hours, waiting for you. She brought food or little gifts or just wanted to say hello." Ethan's heart sank. "She told me she stopped doing that because she didn't want to bother us." Mrs. Kerrigan shook her head. "That's not what happened. Sabrina saw her once and told her she was embarrassing herself. Said you were too busy for sentimental nonsense." Ethan clenched the fence until his knuckles whitened. "Mom never said anything," he whispered. "Of course she didn't," Mrs. Kerrigan replied. "She didn't want you to think badly of your wife." She sighed, her voice trembling slightly with anger. "Another time, Your mother brought over a quilt she'd made. You know how she is. Sewing in the evenings, humming those hymns. She told Sabrina it was a gift for your home. Ethan remembered that quilt clearly. Blue patches sewn. Another time, Mrs. Kerrigan continued, your mother brought over a quilt she'd made. You know how she is. Sewing in the evenings, humming those hymns. She told Sabrina it was a gift for your home. Ethan's chest tightened. He remembered that quilt. Blue patches sewn with tiny, careful stitches. Helen had spent weeks making it. When he asked Sabrina what happened to it, she told him, it didn't match our decor. I donated it. Mrs. Kerrigan sighed, shaking her head. Your mother came home crying that day, Ethan. She tried to hide it, but her eyes were swollen. She told me she must have embarrassed herself by bringing it. Ethan felt his throat close. She didn't embarrass anyone, he said through clenched teeth. Sabrina threw it away, didn't she? Into the trash, the neighbor confirmed softly. I saw her carry the bag myself. Ethan shut his eyes. For a moment, the world blurred. What else? He whispered. Mrs. Kerrigan hesitated again. Are you sure you want to know? Yes, Ethan said firmly. I want the truth, all of it. The elderly woman nodded. All right, then you should know about the time your mother fell. Ethan's head snapped up. Fell? When? 3 months ago, Mrs. Kerrigan said. She slipped on the porch, hit her elbow hard. I took her to urgent care. She didn't want to tell you because, the neighbor hesitated, because she didn't want to seem needy. That's the word she used. Ethan's heart cracked. Needy? He repeated angrily. She raised me alone, worked herself to the bone. She's never been needy. I know that, Mrs. Kerrigan said. Everyone in this town knows that. But Sabrina, she planted things in your mother's mind. Little comments, little cuts, enough to make her feel unwanted. Cho. Ethan ran a hand over his face, trying to hold himself together, but the truth had only begun. And then, Mrs. Kerrigan added gently, there were the times she came home with food she'd cooked for you. Meatloaf, casseroles, pies, all untouched, cold, thrown back at her. Ethan's stomach twisted. Thrown back? Yes, the neighbor said. Sabrina told her their house didn't have room for homemade food, said it made your apartment smell cheap. Once, she poured your mother's entire casserole down the sink while your mother stood there watching. Ethan couldn't breathe. I never tasted any of them, he whispered. I never even knew she brought them. Your mother stopped trying after a while, Mrs. Kerrigan said softly. Stopped baking on holidays. Stopped dropping by. Stopped calling so much. She said the world was moving on and she didn't want to cling to the past. He pressed a hand to his forehead, devastated. She shouldn't have had to push herself out, he said. She shouldn't have felt like she was in the way. But she did, Mrs. Kerrigan answered, because that's what Sabrina wanted her to feel. Silence settled between them for several heavy seconds. Finally, Mrs. Kerrigan added quietly, Ethan, your mother is a good woman, a gentle woman. She didn't deserve any of this. Ethan swallowed hard. I know, he whispered. I know. His mind raced. Flashes of moments he had brushed aside, excuses Sabrina had given, little doubts he had ignored, all piecing together like a puzzle he had refused to look at. He turned toward the house. I need to talk to her, he said. Be gentle, Mrs. Kerrigan warned. She's been hurting in silence for a long time. I will, he promised. Inside, Helen was folding laundry at the table, pretending to be fine, pretending she hadn't heard raised voices earlier, pretending she didn't notice the shattered pie dish gone from the floor. Ethan entered slowly, his heart heavy. Mom, he said softly. She looked up, forcing a smile. Did you get everything you needed at the market? Ethan stood in the doorway, studying her face, the softness, the strength, the exhaustion she tried so hard to hide. Mom, he repeated quietly, why didn't you tell me about all of this? Helen froze. Her smile trembled, then vanished. I didn't want to cause trouble, she whispered. Mom, I'm your son, he said gently. You're supposed to come to me, with everything, the good and the hard. I know, she murmured, but I didn't want you to think badly of her. She made you feel like you were a burden. Helen's eyes filled instantly. She just didn't understand me, she whispered, or where I come from. I thought maybe, with time, Mom, she humiliated you. She isolated you. She manipulated me into staying away from you. His voice cracked. This wasn't misunderstanding. It was cruelty. Helen's hands tightened around the folded towel. I didn't want to break your marriage, she said faintly. I didn't want you to resent me. Mom, he whispered, stepping forward. I could never resent you. But Helen looked away, not because she doubted him, but because she had spent years convincing herself she needed to stay small, quiet, invisible, so he wouldn't feel torn between two worlds. I was trying to give you space, she whispered. Maybe too much. Ethan knelt in front of her, just like he used to when he was a boy asking for comfort after a scraped knee. Mom, I'm so sorry, he said, voice breaking. I should have seen it. I should have protected you. Helen touched his cheek with her warm, gentle hand. Oh, sweetheart, she whispered. Mothers don't need protection. We just need to know our children are happy. But you weren't, he said, and I didn't know. Her lip trembled. I didn't want to worry you. Ethan exhaled sharply, half heartache, half anger at himself. I'm here now, he said. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm going to fix this. Helen's breath hitched. Ethan, please don't do anything reckless. Your marriage, Mom, he said firmly, a marriage built on lies is already broken. Helen flinched slightly at the word broken, but she didn't argue. What are you going to do? She asked softly. I'm going to confront her, he said, but not by yelling, not by fighting. I'm going to show her the truth, all of it. Helen's eyes glistened with fear and hope intertwined. And if she denies everything, she whispered. Ethan's voice grew steady, resolved. Then she'll have to face the consequences. Silence settled between them, heavy but necessary. Helen finally whispered, Just promise me one thing. Anything, he said. Promise me you won't lose yourself in anger, she said softly. You were raised to be gentle. Don't let this change that. He nodded. I promise. But inside, something had already changed. Not into rage, but clarity. A quiet, immovable clarity. He stood and walked to the window, watching the road leading back toward Boston. Tomorrow he would return. Tomorrow he would face Sabrina. With proof, with courage, with truth. But tonight he would stay with his mother, cook dinner with her, watch the sun set behind the fishing boats, remind her in every way he could that she was never a burden, never too much, never unworthy. She had always been his home, and he would protect that now, because the consequences of the truth were coming. The next morning, Ethan packed his overnight bag in silence. The sky over Cedar Harbor was pale and gray, with streaks of light breaking through, the kind of hesitant dawn that looks like the world is still deciding what kind of day it wants to be. Helen stood by the doorway of his old room, watching him fold his shirts with a care that seemed unnecessary for such a small bag. But she understood. People often focus on small, simple tasks when their hearts are heavy. You don't have to go today, she said gently. You could stay a little longer. He looked up and gave her a soft, tired smile. If I stay, I'll keep pretending everything is fine in Boston, he said. And it's not. I can't unsee what I saw. I can't unknow what I know now. I have to face it, Mom. Her fingers twisted the edge of her sweater. And what will you say to her? She asked. Ethan took a deep breath. The truth, he answered. Calmly, clearly. No shouting, no name-calling. Just the truth about what she's done to you, about what she's tried to make me believe, about what I can't accept anymore. Helen stepped into the room, her eyes full of worry. Please don't let anger consume you, she whispered. You were raised better than that. I'm not going to explode, he said. I'm done reacting. I'm choosing now. That's different. He zipped the bag and walked toward her. Mom, this isn't just about her, he added. It's about me, about who I want to be, about the kind of man you raised. Tears filled her eyes. I just don't want you to end up alone, she said quietly. He shook his head. I won't be alone, he replied. I have you, and I have myself. I'd rather be alone than stay with someone who treats you like you're nothing. Helen's lips trembled. She reached up, cupping his face softly. You're still my little boy, she whispered. Even in that fancy suit, even with that big city job, you're still the boy who used to run home smelling like the ocean and mud. He smiled, leaning into her touch. I'm still him, he said, and I won't let that boy forget who taught him what love is. They held each other for a few long, quiet seconds. Then Ethan pulled back, kissed her forehead, and said, I'll call you tonight, no matter what happens. Promise? She asked. Promise. As he walked to the car, Helen followed him to the porch, arms crossed against the lingering morning chill. She watched her son drive away, and silently prayed. Not for Sabrina, not for herself. She prayed that Ethan would have the courage to stand in truth, no matter how much it hurt. The drive back to Boston felt shorter than it should have. His mind was crowded. Memories, conversations, moments he had dismissed, all replaying with new context. Every time Sabrina had rolled her eyes when his mother called, every time she'd changed the subject when he mentioned visiting Cedar Harbor, every time she'd said, Your mom will be fine, she's used to being on her own, as if that somehow excused neglect. He gripped the steering wheel. There was no excuse. By the time he pulled into the garage of their apartment building, Ethan's decision was solid, like a stone that finally stopped rolling. He wasn't coming home to negotiate whether Sabrina had done something wrong. He knew she had. He was coming home to decide what he was going to do about it. The elevator ride felt endless, the hum of fluorescent lights pressing on his nerves. He unlocked the door to the apartment and stepped inside. Sabrina was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, a glass of expensive sparkling water on the coffee table. She looked up with an expression of mild annoyance that she tried, unsuccessfully, to cover with a smile. There you are, she said. You didn't answer my texts. I was driving, Ethan replied. He closed the door behind him slowly. So? Sabrina asked, turning her phone off and setting it down. How was your little visit? Did your mother guilt-trip you into staying longer, or did you manage to escape? Ethan stared at her. The words didn't even sting anymore. They simply confirmed what he already knew. Sit down, he said quietly. Something in his tone made her straighten. Ethan, I've had a long weekend. I'm not in the mood for dramatics. Sit, he repeated. She hesitated, then sank back into the couch, crossing her arms. You're scaring me a little, she said with a dry laugh. I'm not here to scare you, he answered. I'm here to talk, really talk, and I'm going to say everything calmly, so I expect you to listen. She raised an eyebrow. Okay then, talk. Ethan took a breath. I know what you've been doing to my mother, he began. Her smile faltered. What is that supposed to mean? It means I know you've blocked her visits. I know you lied about me being busy or tired or not wanting her around. I know you threw away her food, her gifts, her quilt. He watched the color drain from her face. I know, he repeated. Ethan, you're blowing things out of proportion, she said quickly. Your mother is intense. She doesn't respect boundaries. I was trying to protect you from what? He cut in. From phone calls? From homemade meals? From love? She opened her mouth, closed it again. I was just... She tried. You humiliated her, he continued, his voice still controlled but firm. You called her clingy, embarrassing. You told her she didn't belong in our life anymore. In my life. You told her she was pretending to matter to me. Sabrina scoffed, though her eyes were starting to flicker with something close to panic. Did she tell you that? Because you know how emotional she didn't have to tell me. Ethan cut in coldly. I heard you, Sabrina, with my own ears. I was standing in the doorway when you threw that pie dish on the floor like it was trash. When you told her she didn't know her place. Silence. The apartment suddenly felt too clean, too polished, too artificial. Sabrina crossed her arms tighter. Okay, maybe I lost my temper, she admitted, her voice sharp. But she has been crossing lines for years, always showing up, always inserting herself in everything. She brought food and quilts, Ethan said. She brought love. She wasn't inserting herself. She was visiting her son. You're idealizing her, Sabrina snapped. You didn't see how desperate she looked. I saw how you made her feel desperate, he replied. I saw her cleaning the mess you made on the floor with her hands shaking. I saw the way she tried to protect you, even after everything you said. He stepped closer, but his voice never rose. You know what she told me when I asked what happened? She blamed herself, said she must have startled you, said she didn't want to cause trouble for my marriage. For a second, something flickered in Sabrina's eyes, a hint of guilt, quickly buried. I didn't ask her to do that, she muttered. Exactly, Ethan said. You didn't ask? You just let her suffer quietly so your life could stay comfortable. He took his phone out of his pocket and opened the screen. I checked her call history, he continued. I saw how many times she called and never got an answer. I saw texts from her that were never read. I saw emails I sent her that somehow never reached her, but were forwarded to you. Sabrina stiffened. You had no right to go through her phone. I had every right to know why my mother thought I didn't want her in my life, he shot back. He swiped again, pulling up another piece of evidence. I talked to Mrs. Kerrigan. Sabrina's eyes widened. That nosy old woman. She watched you dump my mother's casserole down the sink, Ethan said. She saw you send my mother away from our building. She saw my mother come home crying. And you know what hurts the most, Sabrina? My mother never used those things to make me hate you. She buried them to protect you. Sabrina's lips pressed into a hard line. She's manipulating you, she said. She's turning you against me. She's always wanted to keep you for herself. No, Ethan interrupted. You manipulated me. You filtered information. You controlled access. You decided how much of my own mother I was allowed to have in my life. He took a slow breath. That ends now. Her eyes flashed. So what? You're going to punish me for trying to build a normal marriage? A clean, organized life where your mother doesn't just walk in whenever she wants? A normal marriage, Ethan repeated slowly, doesn't require cutting out the person who raised you. He looked around the apartment, the sleek furniture, the carefully chosen decor, the spotless surfaces. This place is beautiful, he said. But it's empty if the price of keeping it this way is treating the woman who gave me life like she's disposable. Sabrina laughed, but the sound was brittle. So what are you saying, Ethan? That I'm the villain now? That you're going to throw everything away because your mother can't handle boundaries? He looked at her sadly. No, he said quietly. I'm saying that you had a choice, kindness or cruelty, and you chose cruelty, repeatedly. He paused, his voice turning even softer. I could have forgiven harsh words, misunderstandings, even a few lost calls, but this isn't about one bad moment. It's a pattern, a consistent, deliberate, heartless pattern. Her face hardened. And what now? She demanded. You walk out? You run back to that tiny harbor town and pretend you're still a boy with a single mom and no responsibilities? That's not real life, Ethan. Real life, he said calmly, is looking at the consequences of your actions and taking responsibility for them. Real life is choosing who you are, not just what you own. He reached for his left hand. For a moment his fingers hovered over his wedding ring. Sabrina's breath caught. Don't you dare, she whispered. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman he'd married, her intelligence, her determination, her ambition, but he also saw the things he hadn't wanted to see, the arrogance, the contempt for anything less refined, the way she treated kindness like weakness. I don't hate you, Sabrina, he said softly. You're doing a pretty good impression, she muttered. I don't hate you, he repeated, but I can't stay with someone who thinks love is something to be edited, filtered, and controlled. And then, quietly, he slid the ring off his finger. Sabrina stared at it as if it were a weapon. You're choosing her over me, she said, voice cracking. No, he said. I'm choosing who I am, and who I am is a son. Before I am a husband, before I am an employee, before I am anything else. He placed the ring on the coffee table. You can keep this life if you want it, he added, gesturing around the apartment. the parties, the image, but I won't stay in a marriage where the cost is my mother's dignity and, honestly, my own. Tears finally spilled down Sabrina's cheeks. "You're overreacting," she whispered. "Maybe," he said. "But if I'm wrong, time will tell. And if I'm right, I just stopped us both from going even further down a road built on disrespect." He picked up his bag. Sabrina's voice rose, panicked now. "And where are you going?" He turned to the door. "Home," he said. "To that town? To that woman who guilt-trips you without saying a word?" He paused, hand on the doorknob. "To the woman who worked herself to the bone so I could stand here today and say I'm not for sale," he replied. "To the only person who loved me before I had anything to offer." He opened the door. "If this part of the story already touched your heart," he might have said to someone watching, "don't forget to share in the comments what you would do in his place, because no one deserves to be treated like they're disposable." And then, with one last look at the life he was walking away from, Ethan stepped into the hallway and let the door close behind him. He didn't know exactly what the future looked like. He just knew that for the first time in a long time, he was walking in the right direction, back to Cedar Harbor, back to Helen, back to where love had always been enough. When Ethan arrived back in Cedar Harbor that evening, the sky over the harbor was a deep navy blue, dotted with early stars. The smell of the ocean, salted, cold, familiar, wrapped around him like a welcome he didn't deserve but desperately needed. He stepped out of the car and stood for a moment, just breathing in the past, breathing out the weight of the life he'd just walked away from. Helen opened the front door before he even reached the porch. Her eyes widened. "Ethan, you're already back?" she said softly. He nodded. "I told you I'd come home," he said. She held the door open wider, searching his face for answers. "And how did things go?" she asked cautiously. He took a deep breath. "We talked," he said. "Really talked, and I made a decision." Her hands tightened around the door frame. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. "I didn't want you to do anything drastic." "I didn't," he replied gently. "I did something necessary." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Ethan, what did you do?" He looked into her eyes, gentle, worried, full of love, and said the truth simply. "I left." Her breath caught. "Left?" she repeated. "I took off my ring," he said, steady now. "I told her I wouldn't stay in a marriage where you were disrespected. I told her the truth, all of it." Helen pressed a hand to her chest. "Oh, honey, I never wanted you to choose between us." "You didn't make me choose," he said softly. "Life did. Her choices did. And I finally paid attention." Tears welled in her eyes, of relief, of sadness, of decades of quiet longing. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," she whispered. "I never wanted your life to fall apart because of me." He shook his head. "My life isn't falling apart," he said. "It's finally beginning." Helen covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Ethan gently pulled her into his arms, holding her tight as if making up for every year he'd drifted away. "I'm here now," he whispered. "For good." The next few days were quiet, peaceful, in a way that felt like recovery. Ethan stayed in his childhood room, sleeping under the quilt his mother had made when he was 10. In the mornings, he walked with her to the market, carrying her grocery bags. In the afternoons, he repaired what time had worn down. A loose railing, a squeaky door hinge, a leaking faucet. Simple things, but each repair felt like stitching a small tear in their life. Helen watched him with a kind of blooming joy she tried to hide. "You don't have to fix everything at once," she said one morning as he reattached a crooked cabinet door. "I'm not fixing everything," he answered with a smile. "Just what I can." But it was more than that. Ethan didn't just fix things, he noticed things. He noticed her medicine bottles, one nearly empty, one outdated. He noticed she walked slower than she used to. He noticed the tiredness in her eyes at the end of the day, the stiffness in her hands when she kneaded bread. And yet he also noticed the strength in her laughter, the warmth in her hugs, the way she hummed without realizing it whenever she cooked. On the fourth day back, Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway watching her bake. Flowers smudged her apron. The sunlight through the window lit her hair like silver threads of grace. She didn't know he was watching. For the first time in years, he saw her, really saw her, not as someone fragile or old or burdensome, but as the woman who shaped his entire existence. "Mom," he said softly. She turned, smiling. "Yes? I want to ask you something." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Anything." He stepped closer. "What do you want your life to look like now?" he asked. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, surprised by the question. "My life?" she echoed. I don't think about it much, sweetheart. I just take care of the house, go to church on Sundays, help the neighbors when I can. I don't need much. But if you could choose," he pressed gently, "what would make you happy?" She thought for a moment. "Helping people," she said quietly. "That's always brought me joy. Feeding folks, making them feel cared for. I may not have money or fancy things, but I do have time and heart." Ethan felt something shift inside him. A spark, a direction. "Then let's do that," he said. Helen blinked. "Do what?" "Let's create something that can help people," he said. "Something with your name on it. Something that lasts." She shook her head, flustered. "Oh, Ethan, don't be silly. I'm just an old woman." "You're not just anything," he said firmly. "You're the strongest person I've ever known." She lowered her eyes. "I wouldn't even know where to start." "We'll start together," he said. The idea took shape slowly. Then all at once. It began when Mrs. Kerrigan mentioned a few elderly neighbors who often skipped meals at the end of the month because their pensions didn't stretch far enough. Then Ethan remembered the young single mother next door, working double shifts and still struggling to put food on the table. Then Helen mentioned the small group at church who often gathered to share soup and stories during the winter. Ethan gathered all these threads and wove them into something new. A community kitchen, not a charity, not a soup line, but a place where food meant dignity, stories meant connection, and kindness meant survival. A place that carried Helen's heart. "We could call it Helen's Table," Ethan suggested one night as they sat on the porch watching the sun melt into the water. Helen gasped quietly. "Oh, I don't know about that," she said, shaking her head. "People will think it sounds prideful. People will think it sounds welcoming," Ethan replied. "Because it does. And because you are." She placed a soft hand over her mouth. "I never imagined anything like this," she whispered. "Mom," Ethan said gently, "you spent your whole life feeding people out of this little kitchen. It's time your kindness had a home big enough for everyone." When tears slipped down her cheeks, but her smile grew. "You're sure we can do it?" she asked. "Positive," Ethan said. "I've already started planning. We'll need a space. Maybe the old community center, volunteers, donations. But people will help. They always do when the cause is real." Helen let out a shaky laugh. "I can cook for everyone," she said. "I can bake pies again. Apple pies," he said with a grin. "But this time no one will throw them on the floor." She laughed harder, wiping tears from her eyes. It was the first full, unburdened laugh he'd heard from her in years. Over the next few weeks, Cedar Harbor buzzed with excitement as word spread. Neighbors stopped by with bags of potatoes, canned goods, spare chairs, old tables. Local fishermen offered to donate fresh catch once a week. Teens from the high school volunteered to paint and clean the old community center. People didn't just support the project, they embraced it. And through it all, Helen moved with renewed energy, her steps lighter, her eyes brighter. It was as if purpose had added 10 years back to her life. One afternoon, while stirring a giant pot of vegetable soup in the newly painted kitchen, Helen turned to Ethan and said, "I haven't felt this alive since you were little." He hugged her from behind, resting his chin gently on her shoulder. "You deserve this," he whispered, "and so does this town." Across the room, a wooden sign leaned against the wall, waiting to be mounted. "Helen's Table, a place for everyone." Helen blushed whenever she looked at it. "It's too much," she'd say. "It's perfect," Ethan would answer. But even as the project grew, even as laughter filled rooms that had once been silent, a shadow lingered at the edges of Ethan's mind. Sabrina. He hadn't spoken to her since the confrontation. She had messaged him several times. Long paragraphs, apologies mixed with anger, pleas mixed with defensiveness. He didn't respond. Not yet. Not until he fully understood the path he was on. But deep down, he knew. Their story wasn't over. Not entirely. Not yet. And fate, persistent, patient, was already arranging the moment they would meet again. For now, though, Ethan focused on what mattered. His mother, her healing, their project, their new beginning. And as he watched Helen serve bowls of soup to the first small crowd of neighbors, her hands steady, her smile radiant, her voice warm, Ethan realized something profound. This kitchen, this purpose, this community was the life he had been meant to build all along. Not a life of status or social pressure or performance, but a life of meaning, a life anchored in love. Cedar Harbor's community center smelled like fresh paint, warm bread, and hope. Volunteers buzzed around, setting tables, arranging chairs, stirring pots of soup. The first official opening of Helen's table was happening that evening, and the whole town seemed to have a hand in making it perfect. Helen moved through the kitchen with the grace of someone who had finally returned to her natural habitat. She tasted the soup, sprinkled parsley, sliced pies she'd baked at dawn. She wore a new apron, light blue with white stitching, a gift from the church ladies. Ethan watched her with quiet admiration. She wasn't just cooking, she was glowing. "You nervous?" he asked. She laughed softly. "About what? Feeding people?" "Oh, honey, I've been doing that my whole life." "Not feeding them," he said gently. "Being celebrated." Helen blushed, waving him off. "People aren't coming for me," she insisted. "They're coming for the food." But he knew better. People came for the love behind the food, and that love led straight back to her. As the sun began to set, the center filled with neighbors. Elderly folks leaning on canes, families with children tugging on their sleeves, fishermen smelling faintly of the sea, young adults carrying trays of rolls. Laughter rippled through the air. The room glowed with community. Ethan stood near the entrance, welcoming people as they came in. Helen spoke with Mrs. Kerrigan, the two women chatting like sisters reunited. Everything felt warm, safe, whole, until the door opened quietly, and Sabrina stepped inside. Ethan froze. She looked different. Gone was the polished, icy exterior. Her makeup was minimal, eyes puffy, shoulders hunched beneath a simple coat. Her hair wasn't perfectly styled, and her posture, usually confident, almost arrogant, now sagged with exhaustion and defeat. She spotted Ethan first. Her lips parted slightly. "Ethan," she whispered, barely audible. The room carried on, unaware. But for him, time seemed to slow. He didn't speak. Not yet. Sabrina looked around the center. The tables full of volunteers, the steam rising from pots, the hand-painted sign on the far wall. Helen's table. A place for everyone. And then she saw Helen. Helen was wiping down a counter, humming softly, her hands steady, her face peaceful in a way Sabrina had never bothered to notice. Sabrina's breath hitched. Her eyes filled instantly. She's really doing this," she whispered, voice cracking. Ethan answered simply, "She always had it in her." Sabrina swallowed hard and stepped forward, but Ethan moved subtly to intercept her. "Why are you here, Sabrina?" he asked quietly. She clutched a folded paper in her hands, her fingers trembling around the edges. "I didn't know where else to go," she admitted. I lost everything, Ethan." He didn't respond. He didn't indulge the drama. He waited. She kept talking, desperate. "The investors I worked with dropped me after I missed a major deadline. My job suspended me pending review. My parents found out about the separation and blamed me. I've been staying in a hotel because I couldn't bear going back to that apartment." Her voice broke. "I pushed everyone away. You, your mother, myself." Ethan listened, but his face remained calm, resolute. "Sabrina," he said softly, "this isn't about what you lost. It's about what you did." She nodded quickly, tears slipping down her cheeks. I know, Ethan. I've had days now to think about everything. And it's like I can't escape it. Every cruel thing I said, every time I kept your mother away, every moment I chose pride over kindness." She looked at Helen again, her voice trembling. She was never the problem. I was. For the first time in their entire marriage, Sabrina looked honest, stripped of vanity, stripped of armor. "Please," she whispered, "let me apologize to her." Ethan hesitated, but then he remembered. Helen believed in forgiveness, in people being more than their worst choices, in hearts softening when truth is spoken. "Your apology has to be real," he said quietly. "Not for me, for her." Sabrina nodded. "It is?" He stepped aside. Sabrina approached Helen slowly, like someone approaching a sacred place. Helen turned at the sound of footsteps. When she saw Sabrina, broken, shaking, tear-stained, her eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Sabrina?" she murmured. The entire room didn't go silent, but something in the atmosphere shifted. People sensed the moment. Sabrina took a shaky breath. Her voice wavered. "Mrs. Porter, I'm so sorry." Helen blinked. "For what, dear?" Those three simple words almost destroyed Sabrina. The gentleness, the undeserved kindness. "I hurt you," Sabrina whispered. "I disrespected you. I humiliated you. I kept your son from you because I was jealous of how much he loved you. I was so afraid of not being enough that I tried to make you less, and that was cruel. So cruel." Her knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of a table to steady herself. Helen stepped forward instinctively, but Sabrina shook her head. "Please, let me say this," she insisted through tears. "You never deserved the way I treated you. You are the kindest woman I have ever known, and I acted like you were a burden. But the truth is, I was the burden. I was the problem. I'm ashamed of myself." Her voice broke completely. "I'm sorry. God, I am so sorry." Helen stared at her, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with a deep old sorrow that finally had a place to go. She reached out, gently touching Sabrina's shoulder. "Child," she said softly, "pain makes people do foolish things. But you came here to speak your truth. That takes courage." Sabrina sobbed. "I don't expect forgiveness," she whispered. "I just needed to say it." Helen shook her head. "Forgiveness isn't earned," she said gently. "It's given, and I give it to you." Gasps sounded quietly around the room. Sabrina covered her face. "I don't deserve it," she choked. "None of us do," Helen said, pulling her into a tender embrace. "That's why it's powerful." Ethan watched, stunned, humbled, as the two women held on to each other, not as enemies, not as rivals, but as two flawed human beings finally speaking honestly. For a moment the room felt brighter, lighter, sacred. When they pulled apart, Helen cupped Sabrina's cheek. "I hope you heal," she said softly. "I hope you find peace, and I hope you learn to be gentle with yourself and others." Sabrina nodded, wiping her eyes. "I hope you can have a good life without me dragging him down." Helen smiled kindly. "His path will show itself," she said, "but yours will too. Keep your heart open." Sabrina turned to Ethan then, broken, vulnerable, sincere. "I'm not asking to get back together," she said. "I know that's not possible. I just wanted to make things right, before your mother's story becomes bigger than all of us." Ethan felt something inside him settle, not anger, not resentment, but closure. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. Sabrina nodded and stepped back. Helen squeezed Ethan's arm. "Go on now," she whispered with a smile. "Help me serve supper." And they did. Together, the night unfolded beautifully. People ate. They laughed. They told stories. They embraced one another. And Helen's table officially became what it was meant to be, a home for anyone whose heart needed warmth, a symbol of resilience, a testament to grace, a legacy born from pain, yet carried by love. Across the room, Sabrina watched for one last moment, not with bitterness, not with envy, but with respect. And then she slipped out quietly, leaving Cedar Harbor under a sky full of stars. Her chapter closed. Helen's had only begun. 1 year later, Cedar Harbor looked different. Not because the town had changed, It still smelled of sea salt and fresh bread from the bakery, still echoed with gulls arguing over scraps near the harbor, still glowed with that small-town resilience that made outsiders wonder why anyone would ever want to leave. It was different because Helen's table had changed everything. What began as a modest community kitchen had blossomed into the beating heart of the town. The old community center had been renovated with donated lumber, restored windows, fresh paint, and a small garden out back where volunteers grew herbs and tomatoes. Every day, rain, snow, or sunshine, people came. Some for a hot meal, some for company, some just to hear Helen hum while she cooked, her apron dusted with flour, her laughter warm enough to soften even the hardest days. Her presence became a kind of gentle anchor, a reminder that kindness wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. Ethan, meanwhile, built his life around the project. He worked remotely for a smaller company now, one that valued compassion as much as profit. He spent his mornings managing volunteers, and his evenings helping his mother perfect new recipes for the kitchen's weekly menu, and on weekends they hosted something special, community story nights. People from Cedar Harbor, elderly fishermen, retired teachers, struggling families, teenagers trying to find their place in the world, gathered in a circle, shared soup and bread, and took turns telling stories about their past, stories of love, loss, resilience, lessons learned the hard way. Helen always started the evening with a simple phrase, "A story is just a life that asked to be heard." People loved it. One chilly afternoon, as volunteers prepared for dinner service, Ethan stepped outside to take a phone call. The autumn wind rustled through the yellow leaves scattered across the sidewalk. "Mr. Porter?" a woman's voice said warmly. "This is Susan from the Maine Community Foundation. I'm calling with good news." Ethan's eyebrows lifted. "Good news?" "Yes. Your mother's project, Helen's Table, has been selected for our annual Hearts of Maine Humanitarian Award. We'd like to honor her at the state ceremony next month." Ethan blinked hard, emotion rising. She doesn't know anything about this," he said. "Then she's about to get the surprise of her life," Susan replied with a smile in her voice. After the call, Ethan stood there for a moment, swallowing the lump in his throat. Helen, humble, selfless, quiet Helen, was about to be recognized by the entire state, not for suffering, not for what she endured, but for what she gave, for what she built out of the ashes of a broken heart. He walked back inside, unable to contain his smile. "Mom," he called out. Helen popped her head out of the kitchen, cheeks flushed from the heat of the ovens. "Yes, sweetheart." He walked over, wrapped an arm around her shoulder, and whispered, "I hope you're ready for a fancy ceremony." She froze. "A what?" "You won an award, Mom," he said, unable to hide his grin. "A big one." Her eyes widened as if he had just told her she'd been elected president. "Me? Oh, honey, no. They must have made a mistake." "They didn't," he assured her. "And you're going. And I'm going with you." She covered her mouth with her hand, tears forming immediately. "Ethan, I never thought—" "I know," he said softly. "But the world finally sees what I've seen my whole life." The night of the ceremony arrived 3 weeks later. They drove to Portland in a borrowed car, Helen wearing a soft lavender dress donated by the church ladies. Her hair was curled neatly, her eyes sparkling with nervous excitement. Inside the auditorium, hundreds of people filled the seats. When Helen's name was announced, the room erupted in applause. Ethan helped her up the stage steps, his hand steadying her as she wiped away tears. The presenter read from the podium, "Tonight, we honor a woman whose quiet strength has fed not only her community's stomachs, but also their spirits. A woman who turned pain into purpose, isolation into connection, and hardship into hope. Please join me in celebrating Helen Porter of Cedar Harbor." Helen pressed her hand to her chest, stunned. When she finally reached the microphone, she shook her head softly. I don't know what to say," she began, voice trembling but warm. "I never expected anything like this." She looked out at the crowd, strangers, officials, community leaders, then down at Ethan, whose eyes glistened with pride. "I'm just someone who likes to cook," she continued. "I'm not special. I'm not educated or important. I'm just someone who believes no one should eat alone. No one should feel forgotten. No one should be made to feel like a burden." Her voice thickened. "Because once, someone made me feel that way. And I never wanted anyone else to carry that hurt." Ethan felt his breath catch. Helen lifted her chin, her voice strengthening. "Pain doesn't have to stay pain. It can become service. It can become love. It can become a table big enough for everyone." The audience wiped tears, nodded, murmured agreement. Helen finished softly, "And if God gives you the chance to turn your heartbreak into someone else's comfort, take it. It's worth everything." The applause rose again, louder, longer, fuller. And in that moment, Helen stood not as a victim, not as someone overlooked, but as a woman who had changed countless lives with nothing but a stove, a spoon, and a heart that refused to harden. Months passed. Helen's table grew even more. Students volunteered weekly. Local restaurants donated leftovers. Reporters wrote stories about the woman who healed a town through kindness. Visitors from other cities came to learn from the project. And through it all, Helen walked with humility, always insisting, "I'm just doing what anyone would do." But everyone knew the truth. Not everyone would, not everyone could, because it takes rare courage to turn cruelty into compassion. One spring afternoon, Ethan walked into the community center and found Helen sitting alone at one of the tables, staring at a worn photograph. Him as a boy, missing a front tooth, holding a messy apple pie with pride. He sat beside her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She smiled. "Just remembering," she said, "how fast life goes, how much it changes." He nodded. "Do you ever regret anything?" he asked gently. She considered the question. "No," she said finally. "Not really. Not even the hard parts. Everything led me here. Everything made this possible, and everything taught me something, especially the hurt." She looked at him, eyes soft. "Pain doesn't mean the story is over, sweetheart. Sometimes it means the story is finally beginning." He took her hand. "I love you, Mom," he said. "I love you too," she answered. "And I always will. And someday, when I'm no longer here, this place will still whisper that love to the world." He squeezed her hand gently. "Your legacy won't whisper," he said. "It'll sing." Years later, children climbed the steps of Helen's table, carrying backpacks and laughter. Volunteers ladled soup. Elderly folks told stories. A photo of Helen, smiling, apron dusted with flour, hung on the main wall under a simple plaque, "In honor of Helen Porter, who turned love into a place." And every visitor who walked into that building felt something they couldn't quite name. Warmth, home, belonging. Helen's love lived on in every bowl served, every hand held, every person reminded that dignity is a right, not a reward. And Ethan? He never left Cedar Harbor again. He ran the center in her honor, built a small life, a gentle life, the kind she always hoped he'd have. He didn't regret leaving the city. He didn't regret ending the marriage. He didn't regret choosing love over comfort, truth over illusion. He regretted only one thing, not coming home sooner. Cruelty can break a heart, but love, steady, humble love, can rebuild a life. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it frees the future. And you? What did this story stir inside your heart? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know. If this journey moved you, leave a like, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe for more stories just like this one. And if you're ready for another emotional tale, click on the next story waiting for you right here.